There you go.
Now we're ready to roll. Now we're testing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Wabash Carnegie Public Library Oral History Program. This is George Dingledine. I am interviewing Charles Wallace at the Wabash Carnegie Public Library. Charlie, we're going to start off. First of all, we're going to make a historical record of the Vietnam War with the men that live in Wabash County now, relative to their experiences in the Vietnam War. But I think what we should do is get a little biographical background. First of all, tell me where you were born, when you were born, and who your parents were, and who your grandparents were, and brothers and sisters, and stuff like that.
I was born in August 1st, 1944, Whiteland, Indiana. Mom and Dad were born and bred Johnson County people. Lived in Whiteland for, 3 or 4 years, and we moved to the south side of Indianapolis. My granddad owned a farm in Whiteland. My grandmother, my grandfather, maternal grandfather, died in 1926. He was the assistant cashier, or the cashier of the old Whiteland National Bank in Whiteland, Indiana. My grandmother then moved to, after he died, and they moved to Franklin, Indiana. My paternal grandfather and grandmother owned a farm in Whiteland for many, many years. And I was raised primarily on the farm when I was younger. We moved to the south side of Indianapolis. It's 3 blocks south of Indiana Central University, which is the college, which is now the university. And lived there from, I don't remember, until I was 3 till I was 18 years old, something like that. I went to Manual High School, graduated in 1962, and went 2 years to Georgia Tech, and came back in 1964, got married in 64, and went in the service in 1965, October the 16th, as I recall, 1965.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I got an older brother who is 44, lives in Cincinnati, Ohio. I have a sister who is approximately 35. She lives married to a Marine captain, lives at 29 Palms, California for right now. And a younger brother, Joe.
So there were 4 of you in the family.
4 of us in the family.
Was there anything unusual about your family, around the relatives or the grandparents, or anything unusual that had happened? Or
We were basically raised in a middle-class, blue-collar neighborhood, and my dad was a typical Archie Bunker. If you were black or Jewish or Catholic, you just weren't part of our little group. We grew up, of course, with the church, being at Indiana Central College is a church-related college, Evangelical United Brethren. Later on went to United Methodist, but we were just church-going people every Sunday. Our lives revolved around that. We were typical. The era was a typical Happy Days era. That hot rods and 55 Chevys and convertibles, and it's just the way we grew up.
how did you happen to go in the service then? This was, what year was it? In
1965.
And how did you happen to go?
Well, I worked for a local finance corporation, a finance company, and started out as a collector and tried to work my way up to management. But with the war going on like it was, and the draft and everything, they wouldn't give me any kind of promotion. Wouldn't let me go, and because I didn't have any children, I wasn't exempt because of college or anything. So they kept thinking I was going to get drafted, and they thought if they put me in any kind of a management position, that sure as hell I'd go. And so I just said, well, if this is the way it's going to be, so I just volunteered for the draft and took off.
And what was your career then? Where did you go for training and so forth?
We started out at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and stayed there until I went to the basic infantry training. Then we stayed there with combat engineers. And as I recall, I got out in March, took a 30-day leave, and then went straight to Vietnam. Landed at Bien Hoa airbase and April the 3rd or 4th of 1966.
Okay, going back to your training then, you started with infantry training at Fort Leonard
Your
Wood?
basic infantry training, right?
And then went to engineering, combat engineering,
engineers,
at
right.
Fort Leonard Wood
Fort
also?
Leonard Wood.
Yeah, okay. And what was the mood then of the trainees and the supervising officers and so forth? Vietnam was still a popular war at that point in the game.
There were a lot of the old lifers back then. They were probably less than my age now, but who had already been and come back at one time. They'd already been over and come back, and I didn't get any ill feelings about it. It was very, very different. You got a feeling of it being a very, very different type war than your standard World War II or World War I. And there was a lot of talk about that. Of course, at the time we didn't understand exactly what role we would play or how we would do it, but we never knew.
What kind of training were they giving you?
Guerrilla warfare training.
Guerrilla warfare.
Right,
Yeah.
basically. Which, at that point, we didn't know, I didn't understand that there was a difference between the conventional war and the guerrilla war. Just that was the way it was figured that's the way it was. And
was the Army having any problems at this time, discipline or anything?
No, I didn't.
Like they ran into obviously later. And,
not that I could recall. It wasn't just the mood wasn't controversial at all. It was a war. We all knew we had to go, or we didn't want to particularly, but figured that we were going to end up there, especially draftee.
Yeah. Well, then you took your 30-day leave, and then what happened? You reported where and what happened?
I went to got an airplane ticket to California, Oakland, California, and there's where the overseas transfer point was. And we met there, and a friend of mine got on in Chicago. I got on in Indianapolis. We flew to Kansas City. Flew to Kansas City and picked up some other friends, the guys that I had been at Fort Leonard Wood with. And we flew on to California.
You were going over just as replacements then?
Right.
Yeah, not in a company or anything.
No.
And at Oakland, what was the procedure when you got to Oakland? Was there a staging area there, barracks, and?
I think we stayed there for, as I remember, 3 days. Got there, and you go through all the lines and fill out all the papers and sit and wait. And then we had, of course, we had KP naturally. Everybody's got to have KP. We were all private E2s. And basically laid around and did exercises and just virtually did nothing except it's just a process through.
Right.
That's all we did.
And the plane trip, how long did it take then?
36 air hours.
So you went from where to where?
We went from California to landed in Hawaii, and then we went to Guam, Wake Island, and hit 2 or 3 little puddle jumps, on and on and on. And finally landed down in the Bien Hoa airbase at about 3 or 4 days later. I don't know. The time just went by.
Yeah. How was the trip?
Terrible, absolutely terrible. 4-engine prop.
And who was flying the plane? Who was
It was
operating?
a commercial.
It was a commercial plane.
DC-14 or DC-2 or something. I don't know, but it was a horrible trip. They fed you every 20 or 30 minutes, it seemed like, or every 3 hours anyway. And you get bound up on those planes. You can't do anything. It was.
And the seats are pretty close together.
Seats are
They were
close
trying to make
together.
as much as they could.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they, of course, by that time you get 100 and some guys in an airplane. These things start smelling up a little bit.
Yeah.
It was kind of. It was kind of right.
No nurses or Army personnel, female Army personnel or anything? No, strictly Army, no?
Strictly Army,
No,
that's
none of
right.
the other services?
No.
No. Okay, and you land at Bien Hoa.
Bien Hoa Air Base.
Now, how about the culture? First of all, the weather shock would be the first thing I would imagine.
It was very, very hot and very, very dry at that point. Just miserably, miserably hot. And they put us on we got off of the plane. And I think, as I recall, we got off the plane took off, we got on a bus with barbed wire, or not barbed wire, but this covering on the windows, this wire covering, like a prison bus would be, kind of. And of course, that just immediately scared the hell out of you. And you see guys standing around with M16s all over the place, and you don't know. And we got out, and I think about 5 minutes after we got out of the airport, got incoming. So it was something that it was a totally different deal. We knew right then, or I knew right then, that this is going to be a different deal. And then, of course, the people. I'd never seen total Orientals before, never, or total gooks or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
That totally different, with their pajamas and their little hats, and just amazing the way they look.
And this bus took you to your depot again?
To another reception area.
Yeah.
And there we stayed, I think, 3 days or 4 days.
But you say there was incoming artillery fire when you. That was your first experience at the airport.
We drove out of the airport and they started.
It was mortar fire or artillery?
Mortar fire.
Mortar fire. Yeah, from.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Where it came from?
Yeah. Well, that would be quite a welcome. And how about when you got to the barracks? And what were the facilities like?
Tents. And cots.
Yeah.
They were like 16-man tents with cots in them.
Yeah.
And that's where you slept.
And were they shelling the area also? Not.
No, we never got anything. Like we could hear it from the airbase. We were like probably 15 miles from the airbase, and you could hear it all around. But the place where we were was called Second Field Forces. Was a major artillery unit at Bien Hoa, and they never seemed to bother them too much for some reason. We were pretty well protected. Security was fantastic.
Yeah.
They really weren't after us, particularly the new guys. They didn't bother us.
Yeah.
They were after the runways and planes and stuff like that at that particular time.
Well, then how did your career transpire? What'd you do then after the 3 days in the reception center?
It was funny. This friend of mine who I went all the way through basic training with, all the way through AIT with, and he's still my friend today. We were taken to I can't recall. It was the 18th Engineer Brigade. No, it wasn't either. It was a brigade headquarters, and from there, all the guys that left with me were divvied out to certain companies and certain units. And after everybody was divvied out to whoever they went to, my friend and I were still standing there together, and we went and finally asked the first sergeant, I said, "Where are we? We don't have any orders." He said, "Well, you got to have orders." And I recall it very vividly. I says, "Billy, you got any orders?" He says, "No." I said, "Top, I don't have any orders. We're scared." First sergeant, we're scared. What the hell are we going to do? And guy says, "Well, let me call up Sergeant Ferris and see if he needs any troops." So he calls up this First Sergeant Ferris, and I send him on down. So we went down to this unit called the 643rd Engineering Company, Pipeline Combat Support Company. It's a very unique company. It's only 2 of them in the whole United States Army. It's a bastard unit with only 5 platoons. And these guys had went over as a unit. And in about 4 months from the time when we got there, they started recycling, so they had to replace their troops. So Billy and I were the first 2 guys in this unit to replace anybody in this unit. And we just by sheer fluke ended up with this unit. And very, very pleased that we did.
What was the unit? What did they do? What was their specialty?
They built fuel tanks and laid pipe for helicopters. In other words, we laid it from the coast, laid pipe from the coast where the big depot was, and laid pipe all the way from there, all the way across Vietnam.
How many miles would that be?
Got a bunch. I don't remember. We had a platoon in Quinnon. We had a platoon at An Cay, and we had a platoon at Pleiku. Well, back up. We were building the tanks in Saigon, south of Bien Hoa, when I first got there, or down around the Saigon area for the helicopters down there. And that was our unit. That's all we did. We built big storage tanks for fuel, like big water, like you see down in Indianapolis, the gas company, those big tanks.
Yeah.
That's what we built.
Okay, these obviously then the ships would come in and they would offload the aviation fuel and ship it by pipe, pump it by pipe
That's
to
right.
the various helicopter areas.
That's exactly right.
Why was this? Were you in relatively safe territory when you were building these pipelines?
We were down in Saigon. We were down around the Bien Hoa air base, or down. It's Long Bends was our camp name, Long Bend Post, but it was near Bien Hoa and Saigon and in that area. And yeah, we were relatively. We went to town about every other night as we pleased, and really not. Security was. We just didn't have any problems at all at that time.
Obviously that nobody was taking care of the environment or the ecology. If you wanted to lay a pipe, you'd rip a hole wherever it was in the road or anything else.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
You set up your pump stations every a quarter of a mile to half a mile, however you did it.
Yeah. Now, did they have to guard those those pumps? They never had any problems with them?
Nobody ever bought them.
Huh. That's all I didn't know.
Yeah. We're from where we were at that time. Just never, no problem at all.
Okay, and how long did you stay on this operation?
2 months.
2 months, and you'd finished, or what? Why did they do something else?
We had finished it to the point where some of the other engineers, the construction units, could maintain it and keep it, replace the valves and stuff as they went back. Which we were in a maintenance group. We were totally a combat group, support group that built. Pipelines, all we did. After we built it, we were done. We didn't man the fuel. We didn't do anything. And I don't know, I still don't know to this day, why we went north, but we took off. In the middle of the night one night, we all packed up. Some of us drove, and some of us flew, and some of us took a boat and went up to Central Highlands up in Pleiku. Mm-hmm. And of course it's in the middle of the jungle and the rainforest and stuff like that. And then that opened up a whole different world for us.
They sent the whole. This was a battalion.
It's a company.
Company.
Yeah.
They sent the whole company to Pleiku.
Middle of the night.
Yeah.
We packed up and went.
And what did you find when you got to Pleiku? What was your mission this time?
To link up with the coast of Quinnon and run a pipe from Quinnon all the way to Pleiku. There was two major. The First Cavalry Division was in NK at the time. They had a gigantic helicopter group who we eventually ended up with. And Pleiku at Camp Hollowell had a giant for the 4th Division. All their helicopters were at Camp Hollowell in Pleiku, and so there was a major concentration of helicopters there. Where we had to build the tanks and lay the pipe for them.
And what what problems did this cause?
Well, it was a typical. That's where the war really hit us, and we had never seen this type of thing where we were before. But up there, where you lay the pipe, you might go back the next day and might be all gone, and you're constantly under harassing fire. Where we were at, we were at a Camp Blackhawk in between Saigon and NK. It was a little fire base, is all it was. And how you get harassed and shot at, and bombed and mortared. And then we were with the 1st Cav Division up there. And of course we didn't go to work like we did before. You went out and worked when you could, not when you just didn't have a regular time schedule to work on. You couldn't, because sometimes you had to just stay in a bunker for 2 or 3 days. You just never knew.
Now, did you lose any men up here?
We lost, towards the end, we lost, I think there was about, out of our platoon, we had 34, 35 guys. I was in headquarters platoon. But the 1st and 2nd, as I remember, the 1st and 2nd platoon was at Blackhawk. The 3rd platoon was at NK with us, with the headquarters company, and then the 4th platoon was in Quinnon. And I think we lost probably half of the 1st and 2nd platoon. And the 3rd platoon had some WIAs, but not a hell of a lot. And after I left, I guess when I left, they got some reports of some of the guys that got it.
What was the problem as to identifying the enemy, or there was no, as I guess, there was no front as such. It was just a hit and run. It was kind of funny. We were with the mountains with the Montagnard people, with the mountain people, and they were basically anti
North Vietnamese people.
Mm-hmm.
And they were sometimes sympathizers, but they were, as an overall group, they were also guerrillas fighting against the guerrilla.
Mm-hmm.
So we pretty much knew, if they were around the Montagnards, that we pretty relatively knew that there wasn't any BC around.
Mm-hmm.
But if a Vietnamese looks like a Vietnamese, and you don't know. At that time, the NVA, you could, from the regular army, North Vietnamese army, wasn't in our area as much as they were farther north.
Mm-hmm.
But the Charlie, the Viet Cong, they were all around us all the time, and you could not tell. You did not know from
Mm-hmm.
1 minute to the next who was and who wasn't.
Did they wear uniforms?
Black
They-
pajamas and sandals,
Uh-huh.
little hats.
Yeah.
And they had basic equipment on them.
Yeah.
But when you were fighting, you pretty much knew who was a Charlie and who wasn't.
Now, I read that not too long ago that Vietnamese people are lowlands dwellers, and only about 10% of the people live in the mountains and so forth, and that the average Vietnamese person is actually afraid of hills or mountains. Did you find that to be true?
I don't remember it.
Yeah.
If I did, we didn't, like where we were at, like the Montagnards, the mountain people.
Yeah.
They were two good fighters. But
Yeah.
as I remember, the Arvin army wasn't worth a crap anyway. They were scared all the time. And
Yeah.
They weren't very good fighters.
Then how long did you stay up on the highlands here then?
Until I came back in May of, I was there from about June till May,
Yeah.
almost 11 months.
Yeah.
We never left there.
Did you think that there was a possibility you'd be pulling another term over there? Or?
No,
No.
never. I could have volunteered
Yeah.
and stayed for another year. Probably, but I
Was
didn't.
there any bonus or anything at that time for?
There were some re-enlistment bonuses, but I don't really. They weren't near as attractive as they were later on down the road.
Yeah.
And I would have had to re-enlist to stay another year,
Yeah.
which I didn't want to do.
Had you gone up in rank at all?
Yeah, I was. It was kind of funny because there was too many guys knew how to type,
Yeah.
and I was one that knew how to type. So that's why they brought me into headquarters company as the supply spec 4, who was a supply clerk. My MOS was a 12B40, but which was a combat engineer, but a 76Y, 76 something was a supply clerk. So they gave me a secondary MOS of that and let me, which was totally boring to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I stayed there. I was in and out of the headquarters company, or in and out of Pleiku, and traveling most of the time between the other guys, taking them stuff, getting them clothes and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the sergeant, called him Barney Fife, I forget his name, was playing around one time out in the bush and got zapped, and so then they didn't have anybody take his place because they couldn't get replacements to our company like they could the infantry or the other people. So they just want to know if I wanted to be the supply sergeant. I said, yeah, I will. But so I was about 14, 15 months in service, and I was temporary rank of E5, and I made it on. They just let me keep it.
Mm-hmm.
So I had done very well in terms of rank.
Yeah. What did they do? That was basically the career right there with the engineering company and the battalion and so forth. What happened later, did you hear, to the organization?
Well, I came back to Fort Leonard Wood in May, and we were one of two. There was only two in the whole company. In the whole United States Army, there was only two of these companies.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one was also at Fort Leonard Wood.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the guys that had recycled earlier had went naturally to this company because that's the only place you can go.
Mm-hmm.
Or any only place that would be suitable for a guy that was in a pipeline unit to go back to another pipeline unit. And so as I came back, I talked to some of the guys recycled after that and came back. And we heard that they had went from there on north someplace, and we lost track of them. I lost track of them.
Mm-hmm. Did you flew back the same way that you went over, or you came back?
No, we flew back out of Cameron Bay, and came back the northern route instead of the southern route over Alaska. Tokyo, landed in Tokyo. And we was going to land in Nome, Alaska, but we couldn't land because of the snowstorm. It took us like...
So that basically took care of your Army career then, and not too long afterwards you were discharged on what date?
October 16th, 1967.
What were you conscious of what was going on at home? I mean, had the protests...
They had just started.
They just started?
Yeah, they had just started. And they... when I came back, I landed at Seattle Airport. And I had, as I remember, never seen a long-haired hippie before. And the dramatic change that the people, the miniskirt, for example, you read about it in the Stars and Stripes. You see the girls. And Bob Hope show, they came over nationally. You saw the girls, but you didn't really realize the effect that I didn't realize. But that's the way life was. Life was beginning, and it was totally strange to me.
Yeah. The Army also, since the Korean War, had been integrated, and what were your experiences there with blacks? Were there any blacks in the outfit? And
we had probably 10 to 15 blacks. They were, a couple of them were very, very nice, very good friends of mine. Dick Colbert from Kokomo, Indiana, was a good friend of mine. But basically, they were by themselves. They were loners. They didn't want to be integrated. They wanted to be they wanted to be segregated. The majority of them did. Very racial, very a lot of racial overtones went through the company. They just didn't. They wanted to be with them. They wanted to work with themselves, be by themselves. They did not want to have any. They were not. I'm searching for the words. They didn't want to be not part of the team, but I was always afraid that if I ever got in real trouble, that if I had 2 or 3 of those guys with me, that I wouldn't be able to walk away from them. They just, I don't know, I just got that feeling from them.
Did you have any black officers?
No.
Enlisted men, any of them work their way up to anything?
Some of the older guys in the company, like the first, not the first sergeant, but the E7s. There was a couple of E7s that were black. Nice guys, older blacks. I'm talking basically young blacks, the ones that cause the most of the problems, not the older fellows.
Had the frag, does that mean anything? Fragging, what they got on to later with throwing hand grenades at each other. That hadn't started yet. How about had the drug culture started out there? What was...
There was a lot of there was a lot of drugs, mostly marijuana.
Was it easily available?
You could go up to any kid and get a pack of cigarettes, ask him for a pack of marijuana cigarettes, and he'd give it to you. And they would look exactly like any cigarette you buy out of a machine. You could not tell the difference, wrapped in the same way.
Yeah. And there were quite a few smoking them, a lot smoking them, not many, or...
The guys from California, the East Coast or the West Coast, knew more about it than anybody did. Basically, the Midwestern guys didn't do much of it. And I'm not saying the guys on the West Coast did a lot of it. They knew how to smoke it, and if you wanted to, fine. If you didn't, fine. The blacks mainly were into it pretty heavy. They stayed stoned quite a bit.
Were there any other drugs available? Did you find anything else? Cocaine or...
No, I didn't find any. Opium was readily available to you if you wanted. The old Papasons always had an opium pipe and most of the BC had it. Opium, you could get it just and smoke it and anything you want to do with it. They were jacked up half the time anyway. That's just the way they were.
Did that shock you? That culture shock you coming out of this environment of Indianapolis? And
I'd never heard of marijuana. I mean, I'd heard of drugs naturally, pills and the uppers and the downers, but I'd never really been exposed to marijuana before. Even in Indianapolis, I'd never been exposed to it. I had absolutely no idea what it was.
Were they trying to control that? The Army trying to control that at that time, or they didn't recognize the problem, or
they didn't. As I recall, they didn't seem to be aggressively trying to subdue that. If they caught you with it, they'd give you, it wouldn't court-martial, they'd give you I forget what they call it, the lesser punishment, like they'd take a stripe away from you or something like that. But they never did, as I remember, never court-martialed anybody because of smoking grass.
Do you think that would have helped?
I don't know. That wasn't the main theme with the people we were around. That wasn't our job. Was getting the job done and not getting killed.
Yeah.
Trying to do it. It didn't at that point didn't seem to be a major problem.
What did you do for recreation when you were there?
When we were out down south, like we went to town 2 or 3 nights a week.
What would be town?
Bien Hoa.
How large?
Oh, it'd be about the size of.
Okay, you'd go to Bien Hoa, the size of LeGros, and what would happen?
Well,
what would you do?
It's not. It wasn't LeGros. It seemed like it was more like maybe the size of Wabash, but it didn't, because the village was a giant populace. I mean, a lot of people, a relatively small town area. And I'm going to tell you what we did. We drank a lot of 33 beer.
33, what is that?
Bombay Bob beer. That was a locally brewed, known beer that just tasted horrible. But most of us at that time didn't drink any whiskey. We drank beer. And it was hot, and you had to drink it over ice.
Yeah.
You couldn't buy American beer downtown.
No American beer?
No American beer.
Army didn't supply any? That's PX's, right?
PXs you could.
Yeah.
Or in the EM clubs or the NCO clubs, you could buy American beer, but you couldn't buy it downtown.
Yeah.
At the good places or at the local establishments, I guess. I want to say.
The normal commerce and everything just went on like there was no war,
That's
from
right.
what I've seen.
Well, they lived primarily. A lot of them lived off the GIs. You know, the girls. There was naturally prostitution.
Yeah.
Was ongoing. All the GIs would buy a lot of stuff downtown. I think their black market, of course, was tremendous downtown, and they lived primarily off the GIs.
You went back out in civilian life, and you saw the whole culture had changed, was changing, and as you pointed out, the dress and the drug scene had come on, and the protest had really rolling. Then what did you think? What did you think of what you had done and what you'd done for the country and so forth? What were your feelings?
They tried to convince me that I had done the wrong thing. I think that was the move, and I would not be convinced of that. I totally thought I did the right thing. Totally thought, and I would do it again. I had no qualms about that. And I was very bitter at those people. I still am bitter at them, and kind of wanted to fight, but you know, what are you going to do? I did get in some fights when I got back because of it.
Yeah.
I didn't like it at all. Did not like those people telling me that, protesting and stuff. It was really, I guess maybe what I'm saying, it hurt more than anything else. Really down deep.
How about some of the protests that came from the veterans themselves, which I thought was at least unusual. Some of the veterans were running around for.
I don't know, George. Maybe it affected them differently, didn't they? Maybe they didn't want to go to begin with. I wanted to go. Maybe they were bitter because they had to go.
You were disappointed, would you say, at the outcome of the whole thing, and finally
Very
they let the whole situation collapse?
Yeah, I was totally devastated by that. I just did not agree with it.
Yeah.
That war could have been won so easy.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Of course, enlisted men don't know, basically, the overall story or what's going on. They know a heck of a lot. But how could we have won the war, do you think? Which is
at the time, I thought we were fighting to win the war. Recently, the last 4, 5, or 6 years, like the Westmoreland memoirs are coming out. There's a lot of history and a lot of people now talking about Vietnam, why we didn't win it, why we didn't want to win it. It was a political war, total political war. We could have went in there and totally destroyed anything with our ammunition, with our power,
capabilities.
Right. We could have totally destroyed all of North Vietnam could have wanted to. We could have done anything we wanted to do. Those people did not have the capability to fight us on a one-to-one basis. They just couldn't do it. On a guerrilla basis, they could guerrilla warfare. They could do it. They were good fighters, good guerrilla fighters. But we had more artillery, more capabilities than they did. There was no reason why we couldn't win that war.
That does seem strange that it's, with all the manpower and all the resources that we had, that we didn't win. We didn't even tie, which we did in Korea. You know, we settled for a tie in Korea. That does seem awfully strange. That, we didn't do better than that. Did you have an opportunity to see any of the Bob Hope shows?
No.
None of that got as far as your...
He was in Pleiku one time when I was close to Pleiku, but he was at 4th Division camp, and I didn't. We were invited to go. Anybody that could get in could go, but we couldn't. We were stuck out in the middle of nowhere, and we couldn't get in.
Any other reflections on the Vietnam War and your part in it, or that you can think of offhand?
Right. It's pretty much takes care of the 13 months.
Yeah. Did you belong, when you came back, did you join any veterans groups, or you didn't want to, you had nothing to do with them, you didn't care to join?
No, I joined the American Legion.
For any reason? I mean, just
because I was a veteran.
Yeah. But you've never been active?
No.
No. What happened to your own life after the war, and what'd you do?
Well, of course, I went back to work with the finance company that I'd been with, and I went to worked in Greencastle. I lived in Indianapolis with my mother-in-law. We did. And then I was finally transferred to Greencastle as a branch manager. And then from there, I was transferred to Wabash in 69 or 70, I guess. Yeah, 70. I've been in Wabash ever since.
And then from there you went, of course, to Francis Slocum Bank and vice president and doing well. I think that's an interesting story that you had to tell on Vietnam. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And we'll get this typed and